The federal government says Nigeria's gas reserves will last the next 94 years, making the country the biggest gas reserves in Africa, accounting for 33% of the total gas reserves in the continent. The chief executive of Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, Mr. Gbenga Komolafe, said this at the Nigerian Association for Energy Economics 16th Annual International Conference, with theme Energy Evolution, Transition and Reform. Prospects for African economies. Mr. Komolafe said with a reserve base of 36.97 billion barrels of oil and 208.83 trillion cubic feet of gas, which represent 33% of Africa's total gas reserves of 620 trillion cubic feet, Nigeria can be described as a gas-rich nation, ranking #1 in Africa in reserves with a life index of 94 years. He said Africa, with its vast sources of renewable energy, has the potential with the right leadership, reforms and adequate financing to easily transit to the use of other cleaner sources of energy in the nearest future. Asian shares rose and the dollar edged lower today as investors hope this week U.S. inflation data supports an end to rate hikes and shared the prospect of China would deliver economic stimulus to prop up stalling growth. European markets were set for a higher open, with pan-region Euro Stock 50 futures up 0.26%. German DAX futures rising 0.37%. FTSE futures down 0.02% in Asia. MSCI's broadest index of Asian Pacific shares outside Japan was up 1.6%, while U.S. stock futures, the S&P 500 E- rose 0.07%. Australian shares edged up 1.23%, while Japan's Nikkei stock index rose 0.14%. China's blue chip CSR 300 index was 0.63% higher. Hong Kong Hang Seng index advanced 1.75%. Now, Australia has confirmed one of the largest defense export deals in its history, selling armored combat vehicles to Germany. The $661 million deal was announced by Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on his arrival in Berlin ahead of talks at a NATO summit in Lithuania. The deal, when finalized, is expected to boost Australia's defense industry, create more jobs, and strengthen trade partnership between both nations. Now, the deal will also allow Australia-made vehicles to be sold in Germany.
This is a deal worth over $1 billion and is one of Australia's largest ever defence export deals in history. These will be produced in Queensland, creating, of course, the 1,000 jobs that are there at Rheinmetall in Brisbane. This is good for our defence, this is good for our national sovereignty, but it's also good for our economy. These jobs will make a difference for Australia, and of course, these arrangements are a part of the productive relationship that we are developing with our German friends.
Taiwan's Foxconn has withdrawn from the $19.5 billion semiconductor joint venture with India Metals to oil conglomerate Vedanta in a setback to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's chip-making plans for India. The world's largest contract electronic maker signed a pact with Vedanta last year to set up a semiconductor and display production plant in Modi's home state of Gujarat. Foxconn says it will not move forward on the joint venture with Vedanta on the project without elaborating on the reasons after spending more than a year to bring a semiconductor idea to reality. But Vedanta, in reaction, says it is fully committed to its semiconductor project and had lined up the partners to set up India's first foundry. Modi had made chip making a top priority for India's economic strategy in pursuit of a new era in electronic manufacturing, and Foxconn's move represents a blow to his ambition of luring foreign investors to make the chip locally for the first time. Crude oil prices edged higher today, recouping some of the losses from the previous session, as traders focused on supply cuts by the world's biggest oil exporter, Saudi Arabia and Russia, and a weaker dollar. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose to sell at $73.43, with the price upward price review of 0.60%. Brent also experienced an upsurge of 0.54% to sell at $78.11. Bonny Light recorded an uptick of 6.05% to sell at $79.71. And the OPEC basket crude dealers are offering $78.43 with an upward price review of 1.12%. For some business stories, commendations are still pouring in for President Bola Tinubu's administration for unifying the Naira exchange rate. This time around is the African Development Bank describing the president's decision as a breath of fresh air and transparency into the forex market. The financial institution's president, Dr. Akim Adesina, gave his recommendation in Abuja at the second edition of the Nigerian Employers Summit. Dr. Adesina said the unification of the exchange rates management system is an important reform by the new administration that will enhance transparency in the allocation. The theme of the summit is trade and non-oil, changing the narratives for rapid national development. Staying with that, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has issued 4 executive orders, which includes a review of the 2023 Finance Act, suspension of the 5% excise tax on telecommunication service. On our flagship business show, Business Nigeria, a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Esiri Agbeyi, applauded the president's action, saying this is a step in the right direction.
For taxpayers to first understand the implication of the amendments that have been put out there, but then also to prepare. One of the fundamentals that we had set out in the tax policy, which was collaboratively built, for our nation, is that we should have some transition period for taxes that are introduced. The transition period is important because you have a lot of businesses that then have to make changes on the back of that to comply. It also gives room for the taxing authorities to probably set up their systems to collect those taxes, to administer them. And then in terms of the interpretations that may be required, because sometimes when drafting tax laws or drafting policies that need to come out, if you haven't properly engaged your stakeholder market, you stand the chance of having a lot of gray areas that may be left unanswered and questions that you haven't thought about at the time those draftings are happening. And the truth is, whether we like it or not, there's no one man that's an island by himself. A lot of brain power goes into drafting properly effective policies.